Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Today was day 30 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and we had live proceedings today. There was two panels of speakers dealing with critical incident command decisions and the various aspects of those decisions. The first panel in the morning was called Critical Incident Responses, and it was dealing with the preparations for those kinds of responses. The second one in the afternoon was talking about connecting with 911 and communications during emergency response situations, critical response. So these panels, I watched them. They were not as connected to events as one might have imagined they would be when you saw what the topics of discussion were, and considering that we've just gone through a few weeks now of testimony from staff sergeants, corporals, commanders, and the decisions that they've made regarding the mass casualty the events of the mass casualty. But these panels today didn't discuss any of that. They didn't make any mention of any specific events through the events of the mass casualty of April 18th and 19th, 2020. Instead, I would say these panels were talking to us as though, one, we knew nothing about critical incident responses, that there might be a structure, that there might be officers, specialized officers in that field, that there's training, that people train for these things. All of those things were discussed as though we wouldn't have known any of it. And secondly, that we want to know everything about critical incident responses. I mean, stuff was kind of interesting if this was a seminar on critical incident responses. Now, the commissioners seem to be interpreting their mandate of figuring out what happened and what took place with the command decisions as sort of a license to, write a new textbook or write a new, playbook for Nova Scotia on how to do this starting from scratch, as though there's nothing already in place in Nova Scotia, which of course there is. So it was a little long, not the best use of time. I would have thought you bring in some of these experts, maybe not all of them, there's quite a few, and then you provide their reports, demonstrate some of their expertise, whatever their fields of study might be, but then ask them about, here's what happened, here's what we know about the events of the mass casualty, what do you think? What could have been done differently? What lessons would you take from it? Tell us, and we'll take that into account. That's certainly how a civil trial, a criminal trial would usually work. You bring in an expert on a certain topic, you give them the facts, or as much as you know about the facts in advance, and then you get their opinion on it. But that's not what happened here. There's sort of what's your opinion of critical incident communications, preparation, training in the broadest of senses? And they answered those questions. So who do we have? This was interesting as well, because we had, Krista Smith, whose title is Legal Policy Officer for the Mass Casualty Commission, led the first roundtable in the morning. And participating were Dr. Kimmo Himberg from the Police University College in Finland, who appeared by video. Dr. Hunter Martindale from Texas State University also appeared by a video. Bjorn Ivar Kruk from University of Stavanger in Norway. I may have pronounced the Stavanger incorrectly. Was in Halifax in person. Flew there. Carrie Murray Bates from the Toronto Police Communications Center was in Halifax. Wallace Gosson, who is the superintendent of the York Regional Police and is an instructor at the Canadian Police College on critical incident responses. He spoke as well. He was in Halifax. And Stephen McKinnon, who is the Deputy Police Chief for the Cape Breton Regional Police, spoke as well in the morning. So lots of people flying in that probably could have appeared by video, but I guess that's better to have them there in person. Wasn't obvious that it was better to have them there in person, but I suppose it is. They talked about different things in preparation, that you do as much training as you can for different incidents, that you engage community stakeholders in advance. So if you have a school in your district, if you have a major industrial complex or anything of that nature, that you know who's involved, you know who's in charge of those places, who you might need to work with if there was a critical incident unfolding there. Superintendent Gosson made an interesting point, considering the evidence we've heard over the last week especially, which was that a common problem in critical incidents is not knowing who is in charge, and that somebody needs to be in charge. Even if there's just two officers, somebody, and two officers of the same rank, somebody needs to be in charge. He says in his study, it's less of a problem of the specific tactics chosen by frontline officers or even the weaponry that they have, but rather just, command structure and who's giving orders at any particular time. Of course, we've heard in the last week especially about all of the different staff sergeants and sergeants who were giving orders, not necessarily contradictory, but it was unclear at times who was really in charge of things. Miss Murray Bates from the Police Communications, Toronto Police Communications, says that the information that is gathered, the information must be provided to the officers that are on the scene, and that is, in her view, a critical element of any critical response. It was the Dr. Himberg from Finland said also, he sort of echoed the comments that the leadership must be clear, and it should be on scene. Whoever among the first responding officers, whoever's the superior officer, whoever's in charge takes leadership. And then at some point, if there's an escalation of events, then responsibility can be transferred to a command center. I'll come back to that, but because Dr. Himberg was referring to not a command center that is, mobile ad hoc command center set up nearby, but rather a central command center that is a permanent fixture. And that comment was echoed a number of times, more particularly in the afternoon, from Miss Murray Bates, who was talking about having people in the same room. And then Bjorn Ivar Kruk from Norway talked about the response to a few mass casualties there. And one of them was to make bigger police departments with bigger command centers, and that those centers were permanent fixtures and not something that you would just take around and hope to establish, during the critical incident at the site of the critical incident. So that seemed like an interesting lesson there. Another lesson, just from getting back to the morning session, was to, during debriefing, that there should be a process immediately with the officers so that they can just sort of talk to each other before the end of the shift, sort of start processing what took place, and then a separate psychological evaluation, separate from any sort of evaluation of the tactics and the decisions and all that stuff, that there should be a separate psychological evaluation for these officers. There was even a comment, I know, from Mr. Martindale from Texas, that in cases they try to prevent officers from going into a certain scene if there's nothing that they need to be doing, that they try to keep them out of classrooms, for example, where there's been tragic events take place. So all important lessons, not necessarily all able to be tied back to the events of the mass casualty. So like I said, everybody was sort of talking about their research and talking about other examples of incidents without mentioning the events of the mass casualty. And it kind of leaves us to, do our best to infer what could be made to connect back to those events. So the command center certainly seemed to be one recommendation that was consistent among the experts. And another one was to, not be too hung up on, how that first part is structured. Just get something in there quickly. There was a discussion about how citizens are really the first responders, And with guidance, this came up in the afternoon session, with guidance from the 911 operator or somebody over the phone, citizens can do a great deal of helpful intervention early on. So that was a theme that emerged. Rather than waiting half an hour for whatever resources may be coming in terms of the police or first responders, that citizens sometimes need to act, whether it's helping somebody who's in medical distress with some instruction or providing cover or whatever. So that was a theme that emerged. The citizens as first responders. The other part of that discussion was that citizens can be trusted with information and to be helpful under the circumstances. So yes, some people will panic, but most people will take instruction and handle that properly. As we saw throughout the course of events in the mass casualty events, the citizens that had a chance, you think of the children, you think of some others that were able to protect property or provide information and talk to the 911 operators and such. People seem to be able to do something helpful. I noticed today that the commissioners at the end of the panel, the afternoon panel, more particularly, seemed to be more engaged. They were asking some more questions, looking. I can't imagine it's in reaction to anything I said, but I did think it was something they should do, which is ask more questions and get more involved. I was really thinking more in terms of fact witnesses rather than these analysis pieces, but still helpful to get involved and ask a few things. They ask about analysis paralysis and the human factor and how that is all taken into account. Sort of a difficult question to answer because everybody's different. But then also Commissioner Stanton was asking about how do you ensure that the information properly gets from the 911 operator to the commanders, because of course that was an issue here. So those were all, they were asking some questions anyway, and none of what we heard today was terribly groundbreaking in some ways. I guess the most important things I took from it were the command center, the importance of having that ready to go, ready to be helpful, ready to help the officers that are on the scene first and who, have the best eyes and ears. And then also the role of citizens and other first responders. The other, point of getting there early, there was an example, I think it was from Dr. Martindale from Texas, gave of an officer that was on their own, and they were nearby a nursing home where there was some shooting taking place, and they went in themselves, even though they were trained to wait for the 4 or 5 other officers to go in as a team in a certain formation and all those things. He went in by himself and was able to take the shooter down. Ended up suffering a fatality himself, unfortunately, in that example, but probably saved a lot of lives by doing so. So there's anyway, lots that first initial responders can do without necessarily having the right expertise. So interesting at times today, not really specific to the mandate in my view, as could have been really analyzing the actual events of the mass casualty. And it doesn't look like we're going to get to that tomorrow either. Tomorrow there's 2 more panels. The first one is how to, about making decisions under stress, under stressful situations, and how do you account for that and deal with it. The second one in the afternoon is dealing with the societal context of critical incident responses, the risks, the trade-offs. So I know there'll be some discussion about budgeting and how that compares with regular policing and all those sorts of things. So we'll hear about that tomorrow. So that was it for today, day 30 of the Mass Casualty Commission. 2 expert panels. Very expensive advice, I'm sure. Helpful in some ways. And no doubt will form part of the recommendations emerging from this. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time.